And then it was a nuclear mine. But before that, there used to be a hill here, just like the hills that you see over there. There used to be a hill right there. And before the mine, it was a group of Indians of my relatives that used to live around that. Around here was the old settlement where people built their own homes. And then further up that way, there was over 100 homes where Phelps Dodge put up no housing, one bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom houses. I think the initial houses that were built were houses without houses, and then because of several accidents of children falling in, they went ahead and changed that, and then finally started putting in bathrooms into the houses. But all that's left of the old Indian village now, they took it apart in the 80s, is what used to be St. Catherine's. That was the Catholic Church. And once the mine closed and they people started moving out, the mine owners of Phelps Dodge, in essence, worked with the museum organization, and so they did the historical group, so they took it over. My parents' house that's up there, which you can't see from here, is still here, and that's the only house that's left out of the old Indian village. And there was a lot of people living here at that time. I think if you go to the end over here, at the end, you'll see palm trees way out there. That used to be the old Mexican village site. But we had the
program office,
the crusher,
the gallery,
the mill, and the smelter. All those huge buildings used to be there, along with 2 smokestacks for the smelter. And of course, all that's been cleaned up now. So, and when I was a kid growing up, I used to live at the base of that mountain there, a place called Darby Wells. And there was a time there when we used to walk. And we used to just cut right across.
Bye.
And go by the building and walk right across. Maybe, but at that point, the hole wasn't that big, because we used to walk straight across and then go to town or go to school.
And how many were in your family?
9 children. 9 children. I was the oldest of 9. So, guess it got straddled with all the work.
You.
Yeah.
And nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. Except I'm away from them now. I try to keep away. Yeah.
And they're all still in the area or scattered?
No. I have 2 sisters living in Phoenix. I have a brother living in Tucson, and the rest have passed on.
What'd you find?
Oh, just a blouse that's either, I don't know, from the heat, I guess. Yeah, this is the old home site. We moved from Darby Wells back in the early 50s, and we rented one of the company houses and lived there for a period of years. And then when my dad retired, they bought this house and fixed it up at that time. That was in the early 70s. And then completely redid it. But what happened to the front is that because it sits on blocks, that it started separating. The front started separating. That's why you see the pieces of lumber going across. And the door there was a big gap in the door and whatnot, and so we had to have somebody come in and lift it back up. But it really needs to be redone. The whole thing, the whole outside needs to be redone, and also the inside needs to be redone.
And so this is the last standing house that was in the original
Yeah. Yeah.
Indian town.
Yeah. We have a picture of what the
Mm.
old village used to look like. Yeah. In fact, they have pictures of that up there at the museum.
And what would you do here as a child? What were you?
I wasn't here as a
you
child.
you weren't here as a
I
child.
was,
You were down there.
when we moved here, I was started in the 9th grade.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's still a child. An adult child.
Yeah.
At that point, you had a lot of responsibility
Yes,
then.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
because you
I
had
did. Yeah.
8 younger kids in the
Yes,
house that
yeah.
you were managing.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you get play much on the hills here? Or?
I used to play with my girlfriend. In fact, there was one time when we made a mad dash up there. It was 5 minutes to run up. I don't think I could get up to the base in 5 minutes now.
I'm with you.
Yep.
And was that cross here? What was that something for the
Pardon?
church? The cross up there, or are there
That's-
other
that's one of
markers?
you know how they have their celebrations, Santa
Mhm.
Cruz and
Yeah.
celebrations, yeah, and all that. Yeah.
So except for the mine pit, which obviously changed the landscape, is it like you remember it?
Mhm.
Obviously, there's a lot missing.
A lot of yeah, exactly. There was a lot of houses here. Yeah.
But in terms of the saguaros and the
Yeah, it's the same. Well, you know what's missing? A lot of the prickly pear is missing.
Mm.
There used to be prickly pear all over the place, and I didn't realize there was 2 here. Because of the droughts we've had. You know, we have javelinas every night. Javelinas come in every night and wander around and want to get fed, and other animals. And we've had deer come down in the area. And I mean, in desperate moments, they eat the prickly pear and the cholla. So we used to have a lot of prickly pear around, but it's all gone.
So Lorraine, you grew up here in Ajo. You had a couple different homes. Tell us a little bit about your childhood and
Okay. Thank you for asking. I was born and raised here in Ajo, and actually, when I say Ajo, I mean the whole valley. I grew up about 5-7 miles south of here in a community which was known as Darby Wells. My great-grandfather founded the place, and it was a place that they settled. That was one of their last settlements, because they used to live at Quito Vaquito, which is now an Oregon Pipe, and they more or less got out of there because of that. And then they were living in
Because of the
Chickasoonie.
park, you mean? Because of the
Oregon Pipe.
establishment of the park, is that what it is?
That was before the establishment.
Okay.
Yeah. So they used to live in Quito Vaquito, and then from there they moved to Chickasoonie, which of course now is under Cabeza Prieta Wildlife Refuge. And there are sites in both areas where they used to live. In fact, there's an old well at Chickasoonie. There's an area where they did flood farming. And they lived there for a while, and then they lived in other places, but nothing permanent. And then, of course, they settled at Darby Wells, and once we settled at Darby Wells, all the relatives started living around there. So it was a big community, and that's where I grew up off and on. My dad.
You say big, how big? 100 people?
I'd say probably more than that, maybe 150, 150. Counted the children. When I was, probably soon after I was born, my dad went to work in Morenci, which is another open pit copper mine and owned by Phelps Dodge, and that's where he worked for maybe less than a year. And he came back because there was a death at Darby Wells, and my great-grandmother, who's his grandmother, told him he's not going to go back, he's going to stay here. So that's exactly what they did. They never went back. My mom used to talk about all the things that she had bought, and they never went back for any of that stuff. They just left.
What
So
did
then-
he do for the mine?
Pardon me?
What was he doing for the mine?
I don't know,
Working.
labor.
Mm-hmm.
And then he worked here again for a period of time, and then at some point in time, he went to work for the railroad in Welton. I remember that when I was about 6 years old, 5, 6 years old. We lived in the Welton area, which is near Dome Valley, and that's where my great grandmother's from. Dome Valley. There was a huge community of Hia-Ced O'odham that lived in that whole area along the Gila River, and. So I remember as a kid, my dad, when they'd have weekends off or evenings off, we used to drive to different people's houses, and they'd say this is relatives, but you know, I couldn't tell you who they were. I couldn't tell you their names. I don't remember much other than that. So we lived there for a period of 2-3 years, and then maybe a couple of years, and then again somebody else died at Darby Wells, and we came back for the funeral, and again he was told, you're not going back. So this time they did go back and pick up everything and brought it back. During the time that we were living in Welton, I had cousins living all around us. My uncle was living there, my first cousin, so a whole bunch of the relatives all got jobs for the railroad. So we were in a little enclosure of family. And that's about what they do is when they go here and there, a whole bunch of them go and kind of live together, and not together, but in the same area. And
Now you guys were Hia-Ced O'odham that were off the reservation, because
Yes.
the O'odham Nation had been established at that point, so you were living off reservation.
yes. No, we've never lived on the reservation.
Mhm.
So then when we came back, he went back to work at the mine, and then at some point in time he became a churn driller, doing work on one of those big machinery. I don't know if you know what they are, but it's one of those machinery that makes holes, and that's where they put the dynamite in, and that's where they blast. So he did that for a number of years. And then talking about the area, you could say that the Sonoran Desert was my playground. I walked all over the place, either by myself or with a bunch of us kids. We were all related, very close, and so everybody was very protective. Of course, at that time, you didn't fear anything. You know, you just went wherever you wanted to go and stayed out as long as you wanted, as long as you were home before dark or by dark. And that's what we basically did. You know, during the times when there was harvesting, we found things to eat. Never carried water, because at that time, I always say that during that period of time, the water table was very high. So there were areas along the washes that we would go and dig, and water would come up, and then we'd drink the water, and that was our water. So we never feared anything or felt in any way about anything, even rattlesnakes or any bobcats or javelinas. We were just told to shy away from them and not bother them. As long as we didn't bother them, they wouldn't bother us. So we did very well. The only thing is, I remember one time one of my cousins, his dad had bought him one of those little Model A cars, and it was like one of those Cadillac, not Cadillac, but
Convertible?
Convertible. And so, but it would go chuck, 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 and it would go slow, maybe 25, 30 miles an hour, and that was the speed. And I would just remember the chuck, 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 and you had to do this thing to turn it on. And I remember one time he took us out in the desert, of course, and we drove way out there, probably near the border. And we saw some Brahma bulls out there, and Brahma bulls can be very awesome. And so here we were in this car, going chucking along, and we started hollering and screaming at the Brahma bull, and the Brahma bull just looked at us, snorting, and his feet were moving, and the more he did that, the more we yelled. We were taunting him. I mean, we didn't know any better. We were taunting him to the point where he got angry and started chasing us. Well, once he started chasing us, we chucked along, and the bull kept getting closer and closer to the point where we got terrified. Some of us started screaming and hollering and crying, and we were saying all kinds of things. But at some point in time, we just kept going, and finally the bull slowed down. Well, we went quite a ways, and did we learn our lesson? No. We did it again. So the bull chased us again, and we drove, and I remember he was driving, and he went around this curve. By then we had gotten away from the way. He ran around this curve, and I flew out. I flew out right into a big creosote bush on my hands and knees. And I remember I was crying and laughing, and everybody was laughing at me because I landed right on little bunny rabbit's hole, and they came running out. So I mean, I can talk about all different types of experiences like that, but yeah, I mean that was the playground. That's where I grew up.
Did you guys go across the border? You said you had gone down probably as far as the border. Was the border much of a? Do you remember it much as a child growing up?
No, it didn't. It wasn't anything to me. It was just we went across. My parents went across all the time. We had relatives up there, and it just never thought anything about it. It wasn't there. It was just we didn't know what. But there were other things with the border. I remember some of the elderly women that used to, especially one woman who had a bunch of kids, and of course, a lot of our elders didn't have papers, didn't have any birth certificates, or you didn't, now you have titles to your home, titles to your car, title to this and title to that, whatever you bought. You have your Social Security card, you have all kinds of things, school records. Back then, people didn't have any of that stuff. And so when the immigration officers used to come, and that was a point in time when they'd just grab some of the people because they had nothing. They'd grab them and take them across the border. And so I remember this one woman being terrified, and I used to help her get the kids, and we used to go hide behind there was an area there where there was a little hill with some big boulders. We'd get behind that, but we could see every time a car would be coming, we could see the dust coming, and that was terrifying moments for me because I didn't, the lady scared me by her crying and all that, and I was just a little girl helping her with all her babies, and but we had wonderful moments there. My mom raised chickens, which I had to take care of, clean up and do the things that has to be done to a chicken coop. Out of that, I got my egg a day. Everybody else had to share whatever. My mom raised domesticated rabbits, so we had that. My dad was a hunter. He hunted all kinds of things, so we ate that. My mom always had a little scrub garden also. And there were times when times were lean, and when times were lean, all I had to do was run out there in a little scrub garden and dig through and pull out a radish or pull out a green onion or a little carrot, and that supplemented whatever I was eating. So,
do you think the way you grew up is part of an explanation for how you feel about the land? I mean, your determination to...
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Talk a little about that. About how you feel about the land and how it was associated with your sort of community.
Well, not only growing up in it,
okay,
but learning all about how the desert is, the plants, and the animals. I caught a little javelina, a baby javelina that was still wet, staggering along the trail one time. And I picked it up and went home with it. And I was getting to the door, and I was hollering for my mom and dad to come see what I found. And they took one glance at me and yanked that thing out of my hand and threw me in the house and shut the door. They were afraid the mom would, or one of the parents would come running. But they must have abandoned the baby. But we had Easter. We celebrated all the different holidays. Easter week we cleaned the whole hill. Everybody had chores. We cleaned the whole hill, raked, pulled weeds, did the things we had to do. Then the men would set up the table, and then a day or two before Easter, I would walk the washes, and I would come back with loads of flowers in my hand, just abundance of flowers, larkspur, all the different types of flowers that are out there. It was just, I mean, those are memories that I cherish. My dad, not only with his hunting, but he also taught me how to hunt and shoot and all that stuff. But one of the things that I liked that he did was once a year he'd go over the Black Mountain on the side, and my mom had fixed up this contraption of the hat and netting and gloves and all that stuff that he had, and he'd carry those big white buckets. He'd go off in the morning, and by the evening time he'd come back and they'd both be filled with honey. And I'd be chewing on the cone, and my mom would be putting them in jars and did things like that. My dad made adobe, so we had this big indentation way off to the side of the house. Had this big indentation where he'd throw in there was mud in there. I mean, there was dirt in there all the time, and then he'd start throwing water in it, so we knew we were going to play. So we'd all get ourselves together, and then all of us kids would get in there and play in that hole. He'd just throw things in there, and we thought he was just, well, sometime later, I guess I realized that what we were doing was we were mixing up the dirt for him so he could make adobe. And that's what he would do, is he would shovel them into those forms. Yeah. We climbed trees in the washes. They had huge Palo Verde trees. And the Palo Verde tree nuts we used to harvest. But we also climbed, I remember climbing it. I was Jane, I was this character, I was that character, swinging up and down in the trees, and just things like that. My great-grandmother took us out and taught us how to harvest. And I can tell you that I was a very lazy kid. I didn't want to do that because it was hard work. We each had buckets. They gave us little large cans, and they came in different sizes. Depending on how big you were, that's how big your bucket was. And they had to be full, and we had to bring them back full. Well, then everybody would have to stop to refill my bucket. So I learned not to do that anymore. I had to go. Once it filled, then I had to go home. Whether I liked it or not, they had to be full when I got home. Same way with getting wood, because we didn't have running water, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have gas, so we used wood for cooking and everything. And so a whole bunch of us would be taken out, and we'd each come back with a load, either hands or head or however we want to carry it. And again, that was the same scenario. So I grew up doing that. We had a well, and we all had to bring water up every so many times a week to fill up, make sure that the cans were full that were sitting outside, so people could just come and dip into it. And so, those were all the things that I did out there. In the summer, because we had adobe house, we had this huge adobe house, which was our bedroom. We had another adobe house, which is the kitchen. And then we had kind of what you might call a shack. That was the summer kitchen, it was see-through type thing, which was the summer kitchen. And the adobe house for the bedroom was nice and warm. During the summer, my mom would sprinkle water on it and sweep, and it was just hard as rock. The summer, we all slept outside. We had metal beds, which are now antiques. I don't know where all our antiques went, but we all had metal beds, and my mom did netting. She put netting all up around the bed on top. My dad would fix poles, put the legs of the metal bed in water cans so bugs or scorpions wouldn't crawl up. And we'd sleep out there the whole summer. As long as it was hot and warm and what have you, we'd sleep outside. And then I remember we'd watch the stars, and every night we'd watch the stars. And I remember my dad pointing out Sputnik when he first came across. At that time, it was just didn't know much of anything. And he said, there goes the Russian satellite. Yeah, my dad had one of those old transistor radios where he only turned it on for an hour on Sundays to listen to big band music of all things. And so we were afforded that. On Saturdays when they'd come into town, they'd bring us into town, and they would give us a quarter, and we would go into the theater because we'd go in for a dime. Then we'd get popcorn and soda and so much candy. And we spent from noon on till midnight when we got out, because the newsreels and all that stuff. And then we'd all get out and walk home. We'd go down the highway and then go on the Darby West Road at night and got home. And yes, the desert. I guess thinking about that and what brought me back. I moved away from here for such a long time, and never thought I would ever come back. But when my parents were both still alive, I used to come back, and that was in the 70s, the 80s. Then my dad died in the early 70s, and my mom died in the early 90s. But before that, I don't know, even though I was working, going to school, raising a family, moving here and there, I didn't have time to think about Ajo or home or Sonoran Desert or anything. But somewhere along the line, and I couldn't tell you when, I started becoming involved with the idea of art, in a sense. Because I painted when I was in the 6th grade. That whole year, our teacher's husband was a painter. He used to come in and help us paint. And so I started thinking about all the old sites that I used to go to, and things I saw and wished I had pictures of, and then I started looking out there, and things started happening with the land. In the 70s, in the late 60s, 70s, the tribe, the O'odham Nation, put in land claims and claimed the whole area from the San Pedros on to the Gila River, to the Colorado River, to below Hermosillo was the land of the O'odham. Well, since we were not involved with the nation, more or less, none of us knew anything about it. But that's what they did. And then some years later, they won the land claim. And I believe they got $26 million out of that. Well, I think when we found out, or my parents and the adults found out about the $26 million, they really were perturbed, very angry as to why did they claim the land over here when it was not their territory. They didn't know the trails, they didn't know the mountain areas, they didn't know the campsites, the villages, they didn't know us, period. And so why did they do that? And they were so angry, but I don't know, back then, the way they dealt with their anger, they'd just either move off or not deal with it at all. And that's how they kept moving from place to place to place and lost all those different areas of where they were at. Because those were pristine areas that they were in. And so then when we heard that they were going to give money out, we thought, well, what about us? And then, of course, realized that we're not legal Indians. And I think that when I started in high school, I started getting applications. And I started in the 50s, started putting applications in to join and even back then I didn't know much of anything other than we're supposed to belong to a federally recognized group. I did somehow or other learn that in one of my classes, I think. But I started putting in for it. And nothing happened. So all those years, from the 50s to 1984, we finally got through. And when we finally got through, they gave me back a stack of papers, and these were all the papers that I had put in all those years. But none of us were on any rolls. None of my family, my grandparents, great-grandparents, relatives, were on any census rolls, nothing. So it was during that period of time that seeing how my family and my relatives were so upset about the whole issue of why are they claiming our area, that I began to really think about it, that it's our area, not their area. So during the time that I was living in Phoenix, and when I had some time, I began noticing advertisements about that was put out by BLM, Fish and Wildlife, about talking about different sites, doing scoping meetings and all the things that they used to do and still do at some point, but maybe not as much as they used to. So I started attending them, and I thought, well, I'm going to attend, even though I'm not a representative of the tribe or anything. I wasn't even a member of the tribe then. So I started attending those meetings and became aware of all the things that are out here. Some I knew, some I didn't know. All the different sites. And so then I felt, and I still feel, that I was going to attend whatever there was, whatever type of meeting there was regarding this whole area out here, because it was our area. And if anybody's to protect it, at least I am there. I am there making some kind of noise about it. And so I started getting involved with that. Even though I had no legal standing of any sort, just being a private individual with a lot of interest in the Sonoran Desert and the whole area on this side. And that's
while you were in Phoenix.
Mm-hmm. Working and going to school, raising kids.
So then you came back here?
Well, this went on for 20-some years, and then at some point in time, because of this interest, and the Piñacates is an area that is sacred to us. My great-grandparents and people before them revered it in a lot of ways because it's a very spiritual place for them, and it's the home of our Creator, and so it was something that we all knew, and it was in Mexico, and not really having the resources to do anything. We just left it as is, but we knew it was there. And then we were at that point where we were starting to, in the 70s, we started meeting as a group with individuals who wanted to look at our situation, because none of us were enrolled, and look at our situation, and we talked about seeking federal recognition on our own.
Was that with when Gary? Was that with Gary when you pulled him in?
No, that was
or
way
that
before. That was way before, yeah, in the
Mhm.
70s.
Mhm.
So that went on from the 70s into the 80s, it went on for a period of 5-6 years where we had meetings and talked about it, but just nothing ever gelled. First of all, because none of us had the expertise, we didn't have the money, we didn't know, or the resources, or who to go to ask for help. We knew we couldn't go to the nation.
Why was that?
Because we just never had anything to do with them, and they never had anything to do with us, and it's,
Right, even though they claimed your land.
yes.
Yeah.
And so we just never, so finally at some point in time, because during that period of time I was working for Indian Health Service, I knew their rules and regs. I knew that that the only Native Americans that they serviced were supposed to be Native Americans that were enrolled in a federally recognized group.
Mm-hmm.
And so my mom had been diagnosed with cancer, and we had a number of people with other ailments and whatnot. And it was just a matter of time for them, because money was at that time also, money was such that they weren't getting that much money. Not that they're getting any more now, but that was kind of the beginning of when their funds were cut, and they were really looking at who they were servicing. And so we got to talking about it, and they said, well, we can't do anything on our own, even though we want to, but we can't, so let's join the nation. So that's what we did. And that took us, I think we approached them in 80, 81, and it took us 3 or 4 years to really, well, to knock on doors and probably pester them to death until such time as they finally went ahead and passed a resolution to accept us. And so we started enrolling. And I remember when I enrolled in 1984, there was 150 of us that went through. So.
Is that when they established the Hia-Ced O'odham office, or was that down the road?
Yes,
Mhm.
because after that first year we got enrolled, and then in 84, then in 85 they passed a resolution to establish the Hia-Ced O'odham office.
Mhm.
And in 86 we hired our first director.
Mhm.
To
Floyd?
start doing the work that we had been doing on our own. To do the research, to do the enumeration, to do the enrollment, to look for a piece of land for us, and all that stuff.
And that's when Gary came in, because he had done some work with you establishing.
Gary came in
Pulled him
later.
in. Oh, even later. Okay.
Yeah, way later, yeah.
Okay. So was
Yeah.
Floyd was Floyd and Fernando and
No,
So that
the
was-
first 2 or 3 years there were other directors, and then they came in. But what got us to so anyway, that's what happened with the Hia-Ced O'odham. And then by then I had met people through. No, I hadn't met people through anything. But I did know people through BLM and whatnot, and so that's when somebody mentioned to Fernando, I think, about this issue when they were there at the program office. By then, they were at the program office. Mentioned that the Piñacates was going to become a biosphere, and that they were having this huge symposium in Hermosillo. And so we said, well, we need to go do something. We need to say something. So they did a 1-page statement letter and a protest, and so a group of us got into vehicles and we headed for Hermosillo.
Who was with you? Joe went?
No, Joe wasn't with us.
Who was down in Pinnacle?
Marlene, Marlene's, no, not Marlene, Ramona,
Mm-hmm.
Matia, who's my cousin who's since passed, Fernando,
Mm-hmm.
Mike Flores,
Mm-hmm.
Ramona's husband, and another young lady, but I can't remember who it was. I think that was
And this was the first time the O'odham had really made a statement. U.S. O'odham had made a statement in Mexico about a Mexican resource.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so that's when I met Carlos.
Mm-hmm.
So we got introduced to the National Resources Committee, and so we read our statement, and then I believe, was there a culture committee?
I don't think so at that
No.
point.
Well, we read our statements twice,
Maybe so.
and then got involved with all the other things that was going on in Hermosillo. And I remember we were standing out in the parking lot one night after a certain amount of drinks and talking and talk, and we solved all the problems in the world and started talking about the Sonoran Desert, that we needed to do something to protect it. So everybody was on that same theme. So we talked about that whole period of time that we were in Hermosillo. And then between 88 and 90s, early 90s,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'd see Carlos here and there once in a while, and then at some point in time, Wendy arrived.
When did I see you first?
I don't know. I don't remember. 91, 92? I don't remember.
Was it at the land use forum? Did you just show? I bet you you just showed up at the land use forum. Josiah Moore was chair, and
Yeah.
I had gone to see him.
Mm-hmm.
I had met Floyd
Mm-hmm.
and talked to them about. That was because Gary had recommended I talk to them,
Mm-hmm.
because he at that point was doing your cultural history or some work with
He
you
did.
guys.
He was doing something with the tribe up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
And then Josiah said, I'll do it. And so as a result, we had Joe and you. I mean, we had quite a contingent of all of them at the land use
Yes.
forum,
Yes.
which nobody had seen. You know, we had Barium Goldwater, we had all these federal agencies, and it was one of these sort of miraculous events
Yep.
where
Yep.
all the key stakeholders were in fact in
Yeah.
the same room.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And a lot got done on a whole host of levels
Yes.
as a result of that.
Yes.
And the strong statements that, because Josiah made a very strong statement, the Hia-Ced made a statement.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you did.
Mhm.
You were the spokesperson for
Yes.
the Hia-Ced.
Yeah. I also read our letter
Yeah.
again,
Mm-hmm.
re-emphasizing our thoughts and beliefs and our concern about Piñacates and how we wanted to be involved in the management.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it just seems so long ago, and yet at that time I was still working full time. I was still going to school. I was still raising a family.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, obviously, getting involved in this meant building alliances and relationships with a lot of people outside your own culture. Of course, you had already had a nursing degree and had,
Yes. Yes.
been involved in another culture anyway.
Yes.
But talk a little bit about how you made these alliances and how you overcame differences in perspectives with other people.
I think because it was such a struggle for me to go to school, I had to work. I had children. I had to do things in piecemeal at a time, and so I went to Phoenix College, I went to Maricopa Tech, I ended up going to Glendale Community College, and then ASU, and then I ended up in New Mexico at UNM for a couple of years, working out in Jemez Reservation, and then I had to move back to California, attended some community colleges out there, and then I couldn't take it any longer. I had to do the work that I had been doing here. I had to get back to it, so I literally told my husband, I'm moving back to Phoenix. So I moved back to Phoenix, and he stayed and worked until he retired, and I was over here. Because we were always this way anyway. He was an engineer with Lockheed, so he was working here, he was working there, it was the White Sands, and, you know. So it was always, which was much better for me. I mean, for both of us. That way I could take time off to go visit him, which was much better. But anyway, so I guess in doing all that, I had to, for myself personally, I had to overcome my shyness, because I was really, really very shy, coming from the desert, you know, growing up out there, and not being on the outside with anybody other than my own relatives. And I remember, even before I got involved with things, knowing that I was so shy, I wouldn't talk. I remember the first things I did, one of the first course I took at Phoenix College was speech. I can't tell you what I had to go through for that first class. You know, when you're so frightened, you don't remember words. Everything flies out. You know, you just don't remember anything. I remember he was telling us, the teacher was telling us, well, you know, you need to relax, you need to be expressive, you need to be, don't stand there stiff, don't stand there shaking, don't stand there wringing hands or hanging on, or don't stand there with hands in, you know, things not to do. He said, you have to move, you have to move, you have to be expressive. And so I'm thinking, okay, I'll be expressive. So I did my first speech, and I don't remember, it was impromptu. You could say whether it made sense or not, didn't make any difference as long as she was talking. So I remember I got up and I thought, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I thought, kind of must have been like a puppet, you know, stiff. But knowing that, I did that. Knowing myself, I did that. So taking communications classes so that I could better myself and being able to overcome that. So I don't know, once I got involved with things, I just show up and things just happen. I don't know, I just kind of inched my way into meetings. I show up, and next thing you know, there I'd be. And actually, I think I was pretty well accepted in all the government agencies, as far as all the different areas that they were in. I believe I was accepted as a spokesperson of O'odham, from the O'odham group for this area, way before I ever got involved with politics. With people like that were here, Jeannie Harris, all those people that were here, you know, the old board. There was camaraderie there. There was, because we spent so many hours on the road, sometimes traveling to San Luis or traveling Caborca or Puerto Peñasco, or talking, and became friends. So it was very easy to just, I don't know, it was very easy for me. Nothing like before. I'd never been in a home before, other than working in homes to clean.
I think it's interesting that you have worked with a lot of people who clearly previously hadn't given a great deal of respect to your people, the nation, you know, and certainly federal agencies, mostly the Border Patrol, but not indicated a lot of respect for your rights. And what happened over time, just working with these people and going to their meetings, you became friends?
Became
despite-
friends, yes. I was invited a couple of times to go down with the BLM state director to Hermosillo and below Hermosillo to visit the Yaquis. And got to know them very well. I was on RAC, which is the Resource Advisory Committee which is I think a Babbitt appointment
Mhm.
for BLM for a number of years. And the position was, what was the title? The title, I don't remember the exact title, but the position was representing tribes.
Mm.
And I told Bo McClure and I told Babbitt that nobody that I know of represents tribes. And they said, we know. I said, I'm representing me. I'm representing the people, just the Hia-Ced O'odham, that's all, nobody else. I'm not representing the nation. That has nothing to do with the nation. I'm just representing my family, and that's all I'm representing. So what you're getting from me is a Native American perspective, and that's all. They said, fine.
There were a lot of ups and downs with ISDA over the course of its history.
Yes.
What would you say were some of the highlights, either tough times or good times? What are some of the memories that you have of last
Well, I think the
20?
highlights were our forums, community forums that we had in so many different areas. Hearing their stories and realizing that we could talk about the trees, we could talk about the environment, we could talk about the plants, we could talk about the animals. But when you're talking to an individual or some of the individuals, and a lot of the individuals that we talked to, there were things more important to them. Things like their health, their food. I mean, we talk about, please don't cut any more trees down or burn any more trees to carve or do anything like that. We're taking their livelihood away from them. So whatever we say to them not to do anymore, we had to think through, and somebody had to come up with some other alternatives for them to work on. You can't just tell somebody that has a specialty just to quit, because what else are they going to do to make a living? And they have to eat, and certainly, that was something we had to work through. I remember this issue with this. I think that was probably the only time that we were ever really worked together with immigration, customs, all the federal agencies in Mexico and also the United States dealing with border issues. When we had this issue with this gentleman in Sonoran, we were at a meeting in Sonoran. I don't remember what all the topics were, but I'm sure they were all environment and whatnot, and also border issues, because a number of our members weren't allowed to cross. We're having problems crossing the border. When this gentleman spoke up and had an issue which was very personal to him, and it had to do with his daughter. The daughter had a condition, a health condition, and she had been accepted by a physician or by a group in St. Joseph's Hospital in Phoenix, and the child could come up for treatment. But because the child didn't have the proper papers, he didn't have the money, and so he was begging us to help him. And of course, with a room full of federal agencies and private people from both sides of the border, and of course the immigration people right away said, well, yes, we can do this, and pretty soon, you know, everybody's working together, and for the next few months, they did help the child, they did help the father bring the child across, and the child was being taken care of at St. Joseph's Hospital. And you look at that, it's a social issue that so many of them face. And you know, I think we became champions to him, and champions as far as the community in Sonoran of the things that we could do, the things that, well, we didn't do it. The fact that we brought it open and had the right people there, that brought some solution to the problem, because then the people could start working together. Agencies that never talk to each other, agencies that never work together, but could come together because of this group of human beings in this room listening to this story. And I think that's probably the one and only time that really I saw this whole dynamics as far as the agencies went, that it really worked, and it can work. I mean, there were other times when we had meetings and whatnot. I remember for years when we started meeting in Mexico, when there used to be whispers about the Secret Service being there spying on us, just waiting to hear or see what we were doing, because they didn't trust us, which is understandable. You know, it's a different country, and you know, here we are, what are we doing over there? Plotting against them or not, or what? And so, but after about a year or so, they did follow us around. I guess at some point in time they got to know us and found out that we were really not up to mischief. They were there to do good. We were trying to help the people.
So as I'm hearing this, it seems to me that it took a lot of time.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it took some collective hearing of things, not just hearing things one-on-one,
Yeah.
but the fact that this was brought into public,
Mm-hmm.
where there was, if one person acted, then there was a certain pressure on the others to come to the table and to do
Yes.
something as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's like they couldn't do enough for this gentleman and the
Because it was a specific case, not
Yes.
a general policy,
Exactly.
but a specific case.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And it was doable.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
And there were others that were brought to the alliance that were bigger and more complicated.
Yeah, like the
Like
gold mine,
Kitawa.
the attempted gold mine, and Kitawa, and we had a number of meetings with the principal people of the mine. I can't remember.
Hecla.
Coeur d'Alene?
Hecla. They were from Coeur d'Alene.
Yeah. And to the point where they were making very strong statements against some of us. Against her, Wendy Laird. That we didn't belong there, and what right did we have to be on that side, and on and on and on. We didn't win that case because I think that the people in Kitawa were enticed, were given money, and were offered other things, and so they went ahead and signed the agreement. And so even though there was that threat of contamination of the water,
Mhm.
but it happened. Yeah.
Do you think that if you'd had more time, you talk at time and opportunity, the results might have been different, that it was just?
I don't know. Not during that period of time.
Okay.
I think it's working now because of the fact that they tried to put in a dump site twice. And
Where's
again
this?
in the Kita area.
Uh-huh.
And I believe this last time, Sonoran, the whole community, the business people, they all got in arms and they all protested and marched and did all kinds of things to the point of things that's kind of on hold.
That was, yeah, I remember that. They were gonna, was it U.S. waste that they were bringing, or was it waste from Mexico side? It's a
Yeah,
big landfill that they were
Yes,
proposing.
Yeah, it was
I
not
remember that.
going to be any good for the community, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. But this time, other communities really, really
Mhm.
got involved, whereas they didn't get involved with the heckler line.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
Yeah.
were still quite new
Yeah.
then.
Yes.
Young organization.
yes, yes.
You know, I know you spent a lot of time trying to get dedicated lands and a formal position within the nation. And I know that the ISDA spent a lot of time trying to get the sort of Peace Park, the biosphere designation for this area. And I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about the importance of formalizing these things in law. I understand perhaps it has something to do with the fact that legally you lost the land with the nation, but why do you think these formal actions matter such a lot when your own life, it's been individual actions and individuals getting together to make a difference? Why is this institutional part so important? Or is it?
Well, in some sense, it has to be because Aho is landlocked. It's completely surrounded by federal land in one form or another. You have Aho itself surrounded by BLM land. Our old home site in Darby Wells is BLM land. And then just beyond that, to the north, you have the Barrigo Water Range.
Mm-hmm.
To the west, you have Barrigo Water Range and Cabeza Prieta, which goes all the way down to the border. To the south, you have Organ Pipe National Monument.
Mm-hmm.
And to the east, you have the Tohono O'odham Nation, 2.8 million acres that they have between here and Tucson. So anything that has to happen, because the federal agencies do not have any specifics, particularly BLM, which is probably the only land that you could obtain now. They don't have anything in their law that allows them to turn land over to us, or to just turn land over to an entity. And so it has to be more or less government to government relationships, which the nation, working through the nation, but that's not necessarily so in some sense, but that's the best way. The other way is a nonprofit corporation can get a certain portion of BLM land, and it could be designated as a park, for instance, for community, for public. That can happen, and it has happened in other places. The other thing is that at times BLM goes through and looks at all their land throughout the United States and looks at areas where there might be a little piece hanging off here or a little piece hanging there, or just some out of the way piece that they would call access, which then could be purchased. And that's another way. I know that in the 90s, late 80s, maybe 90s, early 90s, they did one of their plans.
Mhm.
And they identified areas that could be released, and there was one north of Ajo, and then there's a couple of places at the Y area. So having worked with BLM during all having worked with BLM all those years, and knowing them. Because they used to have a BLM member that used to attend our meetings all the time.
For
And,
ISDA. For
yeah,
ISDA.
for ISDA, yes. And working through them and talking to them, taking long, I used to write with them to Phoenix, sometimes write back with them, and I'd ask questions and I'd talk and they'd listen to my story. So again, it's just one of those things where we got to the point of we want to purchase Darby Wells.
Mhm.
So that, started working on that, and they helped us. And then it was 40-acre site, and we were going to purchase that. And then probably before we started the paperwork, I said, "What about our cemetery?" And they said, "What about your cemetery?" And I said, "We want it." Well, it's a number of sections in between. And here's Darby Wells and here's our cemetery. So they said, well, you can't have both because it's too far apart, and that means that large an area, we're gonna have to have community meetings, scoping meetings, all this stuff, go do the whole thing again. And I said, okay. So we talked among ourselves and we said, okay, the most important thing to us is our cemetery. Because what if we buy the village site, our cemetery's out there, and what if something happens, somebody comes in and they want to use that land? What if BLM then tells us, you need to do something with, where are we gonna go, where are we gonna put them? So we decided to buy our cemetery. Then we talked about, I thought 10 acres, and I thought maybe around 10 acres and whatnot, and they said no. I said 15, and they said no, and I said, what, 30? No. So anyway, we had to go back and forth, and then we arrived at 20 acres. So we purchased 20 acres from them. So, and then, but that took us a long time.
Right.
Not because of BLM, but because of the nation. Because we purchased the land, the cemetery in '96, and the nation had passed this resolution in 1984 that they were going to help us do all these things, including looking for land and all that stuff, and buying land for us. And so again, that took another year for us to deal with the nation. Us, BLM, and the nation meeting together, discussing it. Until after about a year or so of meetings and nothing was agreed on, the chairman said to me, well, Lorraine, you go ahead and buy the land if that's what you want. And the chairman over here of the Legislative Council said, no, we have a duty and responsibility. We have a resolution there, which is the law of the nation, to help them and to do this for them and to do all that stuff. So I said, you know, you're telling me yes and you're telling me no. And finally one of them said, well, you do whatever you want. So we purchased the land.
For the record, do you just want to say where things are now?
With the nation?
Well, with the land and
Oh,
with the
well, the
dedication.
Darby was still there, and Darby was still there, and I talked to Cheryl Blanchard, who's the archaeologist for BLM, and she's working on the next plan. So at the end of this year, or maybe next year, probably next year, there will be scoping meetings coming out, and there will be areas for release again. North part of Ajo, which I've been talking to Tracy a little bit about, we talk about the farming area, and so we're thinking about that. So but that's on the mind. and then Darby West, and other areas that the nation is looking at.
Well,
So Cheryl knows this.
But you also had gotten some additional land. You've gotten 2 pieces, right?
No, one piece.
Just the one.
Yeah,
So becoming part of the 12th district,
that's
that's
what we're
what's
hoping
going to
for.
be the piece.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
see.
yeah,
I see. Yeah.
yeah. Yes, it's 640 acres.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, right across from the casino. When
Yeah,
you were coming
yeah.
by, you saw that trailer sitting over
Yeah.
there. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Now, so talk a little bit about your compromise from moving from being your own identified tribe, agreeing to be part or deciding strategically to be part of the nation, joining the legislative council, and then moving towards becoming a 12th district. What?
That's tricky
Yeah.
because first of all, I retired in '96 after working 30-some years as a nurse. And became involved with all this and other things, and one of the other things I did was I got on the council in San Lucie, which is one of the districts of the nation. Yeah, the nation has 11 districts, and San Lucie is one of them, and San Lucie is located in Gila Bend, or just north of Gila Bend. So I became a got on the council there. So I was in my third term when the person that was in the legislative seat resigned after 2 years. So they appointed me to sit in on that, and so it was something that I never ever thought of. I never wanted to be. It was not in anywhere in my thoughts of being or wanting to be. But I realized the powerful position that it put me in. So, not that I needed it, but I'm doing all right by myself, much better, so to speak. And but I decided then that I needed to back off from the Hia-Ced O'odham issues completely, because I cannot be involved in both of them. So I backed off, and other people took over. And in fact, finally, for the first time, which again was a joy to me, as my family stepped forward. My sisters, my 3 sisters, and my daughter stepped forward and got on the board. And finally, for the first time, getting involved. Finally, for the first time, learning the history. Finally, for the first time, learning what there was about it. Things I used to try to tell them, and they would ignore me, or didn't hear me, or didn't want to hear me. And so finally, I do what I have to do with the nation, and there's a lot of responsibilities as a legislator. When I first went in, within 6 months, I was chair of natural resources, which I still am. I was chair of rules, which makes the laws. I did that for 2 years. And that was really a struggle for me, because I didn't know anything about the nation. I didn't know anything about tribal government. And so, so when the 2 years were up, I remained chair of natural resources, but I absolutely refused to accept the position for chair of rules, which they tried to give me again. I said, I can't do it. Somebody else do it. And besides that, I'm on agriculture committee. It was the other third committee I'm on. So there's a lot of issues with the nation, with the lands, roads, mining, stuff like that. So I do my job, and but in the back burner is the is the need to go after Darby Wells.
Right.
But I'm not being, reactive to it. I'm probably proactive. I'm hanging back, but I am making statements, because and I've told them that my term's up in 2012. And if nothing's done by then, even though they know that that probably next year it's going to be released, and they're going to try and work on purchasing it, which is good,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time maybe not good, but overall it probably will be. The thing that's still in my back burner is that if nothing happens, then I will pursue it when I get out, because I don't intend to run after 2012.
Well, this has taken an enormous amount of persistence, hasn't it, over
Yes.
a great many years?
Yeah. Ernie used to say I was obsessed.
Yeah.
I guess I have been.
And what I'm also hearing you say is that the networks of the Alliance, the ISDA, help you move this agenda of finding lands, of being established, of getting legitimacy, getting an office.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, with ISDA. Because we had all those federal agencies and we had all these issues and stuff. And that just added to all the other things, yes. Yes, established better relationships,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
And it was about
Credibility, probably.
credibility. And it was about the people too. You mentioned Bo McClure and
Yes.
Hector was
Yes.
also one,
Yes.
and so it was about
Yeah.
some individuals within those institutions that were also particularly.
Yes.
You mentioned that Bo and Hector had let you know up front, hey, there's this opportunity,
Yes.
which wouldn't have happened had you not had that relationship
Exactly.
with him.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And that's what I keep trying to tell them at the Nation.
Mhm.
Is that you have to build these relationships, otherwise
Mhm.
you can't come in and say, well, which is what tribes do. I am a sovereign nation, and so therefore,
Mhm.
it's a government-to-government relationship, which is very cold and stiff and,
Rule bound.
thank you.
Good, this is very excellent.
Thank you, Lorraine.
You're welcome.
One wonderful thank you.